Hey folks, this is Abel James, and thanks so much for joining us on the Fat Burning Man Show, where we talk about real food and real results. Hey, how much time have you spent outside today? Hopefully you're outside right now, but if you're not, I just want to say it's more important than ever to get outdoors, breathe some fresh air, take a break, and enjoy some sunshine. But according to a survey done by the EPA, the average American spends 93% of their time indoors, either in enclosed buildings or enclosed vehicles. Ugh. One thing I want to mention immediately is that the air quality is stuffy and terrible. There's a lot of off-gassing in cars, and rooms, carpets, paints, things like that. It's not good to be breathing that bad air. It shaves years off your life. So spending all this time in that stuffy air is actually doing more harm than most of us realize. And connection to nature shouldn't be something that's seen as dispensable, something that we could have or not have. It's an essential part of who we are. We are part of nature itself, and it's essential to a high quality of life, health, social well-being, prosperity, and productivity. It helps us feel actually connected to something, like we're part of something. So to help us sort all this out and keep things in perspective, we're here with one of my very good friends and former cross-country teammate from high school back in New Hampshire, Mr. Will McDonough. Will is a dad of three, a runner, fast runner, a writer, and a teacher who never stops moving. And today, he's here to share with us the importance of systemization, letter writing, and getting outdoors. But before we get there, here's a review that just came in from Yvonne. She says, "This podcast is one of the best in providing information on living my healthiest life yet. As a psychotherapist, I appreciate the positive and upbeat nature of the show. Fat Burning Man is my go-to podcast for myself, my clients, and my family. Thank you for sharing your inspiration with us. Cheers." That really means a lot to me. One thing that I'm always surprised about is how many professionals like you listen to this show. You know, the people who are training and coaching and healing. And I've just, you know, when I see you folks out in the world and you come up to me and you're just like, "Hey, I've been listening to the podcast for a while," you feel like friends. So I just want to say, even though we may not know each other in real life, it's so cool that you folks are listening to this show and have been for so long and connecting with what we're doing here, because we really believe in it, and we hope that we can help with some of the misinformation that's out there, help put things into perspective a little bit, mostly because I'm kind of a nut and I do live out in nature. You know, we do have a different way of going about things, and I've been very fortunate to have a lot of wonderful teachers and family members who have passed down things that I really believe are essential to a healthy life. And a lot of those are lifestyle factors that have something to do with getting outside and getting in nature. And I spent a lot of time back in the day outside with Will on quite a few adventures. So there's a lot of wisdom that he has to offer today. I can't wait for you guys to hear what he has to say. But anyway, how are you doing? Have you had any luck with the wild way of life, or have you enjoyed anything you've listened to on this show? Well, I'd love to hear from you. Just drop me a line, send an email at abel@fatburningman.com. It's ABEL. Leave a review if you can. That helps to support the show. But, you know, even though we live in the boonies up here in the mountains, I do hope that we're helping to build some sort of virtual community. And nothing makes me happier than hearing that multiple followers of this show or our work have gotten together in whatever place they're living in and started up their own little groups of health nuts. So I just want to say to all of you professional health nuts and amateur health nuts out there, thanks so much for listening and supporting this show. All right, so there's a bunch of other cool stuff that we've been up to for the past year and change, including I've been secretly recording over 400 virtual reality videos that are all recorded in 360 degrees. And a lot of these are educational virtual adventure tours to really wacky, hard to get to and cool places like Yellowstone Volcano, Capulin Volcano, America's Stonehenge, a 1,400-foot effigy in the ground, of a snake or a serpent with an egg that's thousands of years old. I mean, we really have already gone to so many wacky places, but there are a lot more coming. So be sure, if you're into that kind of offbeat and adventurous type stuff, go to abeljames.com and you can find all of that without outside advertising or any nonsense. You can find all those hundreds of videos and VR experiences for free. So that's at abeljames.com. And if you'd like to support this show and some of the other work that we're doing, then go ahead and visit wildsuperfoods.com. And every purchase from there, which is health supplements, every purchase directly supports this show and hopefully helps you get as healthy as you can be. These are literally the supplements that Allison and I have been taking every day for years at this point, and we can't wait to hear how you like them. So any device you're on, and right now it's only in the US, hopefully will be international soon, but check out wildsuperfoods.com. And then if you are international or you're more into some of our educational and coaching programs, be sure to check out our store at fatburningman.com. And of course, the 300 free episodes of the Fat Burning Man podcast like this one right now. So fatburningman.com for that one there. All right, on to the show. In this episode, with my high school cross-country teammate turned teacher and Renaissance man, Mr. Will McDonough, you're about to learn how to create time for your passions, even if you have 3 kids or you're strapped for time, how to write your first book or 2, how to run fast, even in your Tom Brady years, the unique challenges facing the next generation of health nuts, and tons more. Let's go hang out with Will. All right, folks, I am so psyched to be here today with a dear old friend hailing from the White Mountains of New Hampshire with pit stops in Vermont and Utah. Mr. Will McDonough is a dad, runner, writer, and teacher who now calls Connecticut home. Will never stops moving. He has 3 children, 5, 6, and 8, has run hundreds of races from the 800 meter through 50K, is the author of 2 books, one of which is right here, coaches cross country, founded a summer camp in 2015, and teaches 8th grade English and world cultures. Will, my dear friend, thank you so very much for joining us.
Oh, thank you, Abel. I'm loving being here already.
It's been a long time coming. There's so much that we can talk about, and we will, but let's start with just all the things that you do. So many people use lack of time as an excuse, which is to some degree illusory, but also totally a real thing when you're a dad of 3 and you're teaching, you're doing all these things, and you're still running and coaching, and you're still a quite fast runner, even though we're not spring chickens anymore. So how do you do all this stuff and keep it all straight?
Oh, man. Yeah, I mean, that's the question, right? That's the question of our lives, is we've got this finite number of hours in a day, and I've often felt, from when I was very young, I just wish there were 4 more hours. Mm-hmm. I wish there was a little bit longer. I'm one of those people who, in my ideal world, I'd burn the candle at both ends. I'd stay up till 1 and then I'd wake up before the sun rises. And I think, acknowledging that I can't do both of those things and still have the energy that I need in a day is really humbling, because then I need to prioritize, right? And I think, always, especially being a dad, thinking about the triage of my kids' needs, my family's needs, always being paramount, right? Always being at the forefront, but then also having a job and having, my handful of students who I care about so deeply, and I want to be present for them. I want to be there for them. And then being a spouse, right? And having someone that I need to attend to, and then myself, and my own needs. And so it is hard. And I think the thing that I've learned to appreciate about myself is just that I need systems. I need kind of ways of prioritizing my time that are written down and that I can follow. And I'm not someone who loves schedules, but I need reminders. I need index cards that remind me to take care of myself, that remind me that when I'm my best self, I'm capable of fitting things in.
Yeah.
One example, I knew that I needed a reflective process for my teaching. And I knew that I had this really high standard for myself, that if I started a blog, I would spend a month writing a blog post and never hit publish. And so I just had to create this system where every Thursday now I spend 30 minutes writing, and no matter where I am in the editing process, how complete my ideas are, I hit publish after 30 minutes.
Yeah.
And I call it the Thursday 30. And everyone who reads the blog knows that and knows that this is my process, and it's a little bit incomplete, and it's kind of like writing a handwritten letter to someone, that it's like, hey, here's what I've got the time for on a Thursday, because on any given Thursday, I can fit 30 minutes in. And I know that. Some days it's at 9 p.m. Sometimes I'm waking up and setting my alarm for 4:30 and waking up and doing it if I know I've got a packed day. But it's important to me, and I've done it now for 3 years. And
wow.
It's one example of just being able to create these systems with what works for me to hold myself accountable, because I need that accountability. I need to know, one, there's someone out there reading it, right? Just like with my running, if I know that there's a race on the horizon, I've got to be prepared for that race, and having that accountability to set the alarm for 4:30 or to go out and get to the track or get to that hill workout after it's dark, after my kids are asleep. You know, it's what I need to do to take care of myself.
Why? We're in our mid-30s now, you know, like we don't need to be fast anymore. We're not competing. So what is the carrot that's kind of encouraging you to keep that fit and keep your speed and still pursue these things, even though you are ridiculously busy?
Yeah, I mean, I'm one of those, I kind of feel often that I'm kind of like a husky dog, right? Where I need to be pulling something.
Uh-huh.
I need to be doing something hard. And I've always loved that. My favorite days are the days where I fall into bed exhausted from struggling through something, whether it's chopping wood growing up and stacking wood, or whether it's climbing a mountain or working at a summer camp or doing anything. I love that feeling of exhausting myself. And I think that's what really drew me to running, you know, sophomore year of high school when I first started running cross country. It pulled me in. You were there.
Yeah.
Right.
Dude, I remember this. We were running at the same time.
The first race I ever ran, you passed me at 2 miles and blew by me. And
that one time,
the barn, gone out too hard.
It never happened again. I remember because
it never happened again.
Yeah, it started, and I was like, I was pretty fast because I ran in junior high, did track and stuff like that. But then, you know, it's like I'm doing too many things to be a super fast runner and what have you. And so it's just like I started to do it a little bit more recreationally. But I watched you just go from being kind of like an average athlete, I guess, to being one who was getting so much better so fast. And you were one of the few people on the team who really improved over the course of that season. It's been so fun to watch you. You know, what is it, 15 plus years later now, maybe more than that.
More, right?
Yeah. I don't want to say that it's more, but it is. And now you're still doing it and you're still loving it. And I think that's such a beautiful and rare thing.
Yeah. I think it is. I think what I found in that was a real sense of, you know, the emotional relief that it gave me too, in terms of just kind of having a stress release and finding running that I could almost just sweat my problems out a little bit.
I know what you mean.
And sometimes I worry that it sort of enables me to not actually deal with the problems.
Sure.
That if I'm always running, if I'm like, okay, 10 miles will get these problems to go away.
Right.
I haven't actually dealt with the problems. So I do think as I've aged and, you know, become wiser, I've realized, okay, I do actually have to either spend the time running, thinking through these dilemmas that I'm, you know, that are ahead of me, but then also just recognizing that conversations that I need trustworthy friends around who I can bounce ideas off of, and running can't be my only way to run from my problems, you know?
Yeah. Now let's use that as an example though, because it sounds like you don't always do it at the same time, especially, you know, living in the Northeast. I remember running in the winter or different seasons was especially hard to keep that fitness up, to not get injured. How do you keep this going and make sure it's in your schedule?
Yeah. So the injury part, I think, is one that I've really thought a lot about, that I really have not gotten injured really substantially ever.
Wow.
You know, I've never had the plantar fasciitis. I've never had IT bands, and I've had little things here and there. I'll roll an ankle.
Sure.
I ran steeplechase in college and fell and fractured my scapula, like, some injuries that are like freak injuries that aren't overuse injuries. But I think a lot of it is the fact that I don't stress about my mileage. I kind of trust the process. I think a lot of runners, are on Strava and they're like posting everything. Right. And there's this expectation that their mileage is going to build, and they're really obsessive about, rounding things up. If they run 79.7 miles, they'll go around the block a couple more times, right? Mm-hmm. They're obsessive with these metrics and benchmarks, but I've kind of found that being crunched for time has forced me to kind of minimize, to say to myself, what's the least amount of running I can do to maximize my fitness? And, I know it's something that you've talked a lot about on this show is, that you can spend 7 minutes, you can spend 15 minutes, that there are these ways you can do workouts to maximize your body's ability to get fit and be healthy. And I think the same thing can go for being fast, that it really forces me to listen to my body. What I kind of tell people is my training is on any given day, I'm going to run as hard as I feel like my body will let me for the amount of time that I have. Right. And so if I only have, literally yesterday, I had 18 minutes to get a workout in. It was after work, and I knew I had to be home. I was going out with a friend that night to catch up after a long time. And I was like, this is my workout. So I drove on the way home in my running clothes to the steepest hill in our town. It's 520 meters up. It's about a 7% grade. And I just went and I ran as many times as I could, making it to the top in under 2 minutes. Right. And so I'm just doing that. And I was exhausted. Like I fell asleep that night. Like my legs hurt.
Yeah. 15 minutes is enough for hill sprints. That's for sure.
And, and then got in the car. I always end my workouts with like some fast feet, just like no matter how tired I am, just kind of like pound it out.
I hated that.
Something I heard from an Australian Olympic runner.
Really?
That like that's the fastest. That's how you get fast. Is your feet need to know what it's like when they're exhausted.
That makes sense.
To like pound it out. And so I do 120. I'm just like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12 to 120. And it's like my kids make fun of me. As you mentioned at the beginning of the show, they're 5, 6, and 8. And like they'll come out with me at the end of my run and do fast feet with me.
Aww.
But just having that turnover be a part of the process, no matter how tired I feel, is a really important element of it. But then I'm also always fitting in plyometrics, and whether it's stretching, whether it's doing squats, whether it's anything. If I'm at the park with the kids, I'm using the monkey bars to do pull-ups. I'm doing ab workouts alongside them. And I probably look a little goofy to the other parents, but I just know that that's what I need. Like Monday was a snow day. I didn't get a run in, but I pulled my kids around the house so many times in our sled, in 13 inches of snow. And I'm out there in my boots and like in my t-shirt because, even though it's 24 degrees, I'm getting my workout in. And I can't post that to Strava. I don't have my GPS watch on, but I can know that it all matters, right? Every step I take is putting me in this position where when the race comes, when whatever that opportunity is, I wasn't laying fallow on any of these days, right? There was no sense of laziness. And it's protected me from injury because the overuse, yes, I'll go for a 16-mile run. I ran, 30 miler this fall and took a couple days to feel better about myself, right? Yeah. It's like you have a hard time getting out of bed the next morning, or I do after a 30 miler.
Sure.
But I also was running as hard as I could for those 30 miles.
Yeah.
For what I thought I could do in that moment, right? And some days I feel terrible and I'm running, 9-minute miles. The other day I raced my kids home. They were in the car and we had gone to the track and we're like flying kites and running around with the dog and everything. And I was like, I'm just going to run home and, ran a 5:04 mile with some uphills in there because I knew that I was racing my kids in the van. And, my wife's there and they're like cheering for me. But like, whether I'm running a 12-minute mile and feeling terrible or a 5:04 mile uphill, like I know that it all is just my body being like, you're underslept, you're overworked,
Right.
you're stressed, you're exhausted. And not being injured is the most important thing for me because I need to be able to run.
Yeah. So it sounds like to me, and I don't want to put words in your mouth, but you're not so attached to the results, but you are honoring the process every day on a small kind of daily basis, not a long-term one, right?
Yeah. And I mean, the results I always kind of have in my mind because I did run competitively in college.
Yeah.
And, you know, there is that I can turn on that racing mentality
Sure.
of caring a whole heck of a lot about the performance.
Mm-hmm.
And so I always have like these times in my head that like, I always like to think, am I 3 or 4 weeks away from running that time in a 5K, a 10K, a half marathon? And as long as I can keep my fitness so that then I can tinker and put in some really specific workouts,
Mm-hmm.
right? As long as I'm doing hills, as long as I'm getting to the track every other week or something like that, just to keep my fitness up, and then getting a long run in every couple of weeks, I'm like, okay, I can hit that mile time if I need to. I can, you know, do that in a couple weeks with some tinkering. And so I'm not trying to see, can I be the fastest I've ever been,
Mm-hmm.
but can I stay in a competitive mindset and have that in the periphery so that if a race came up, if something happened, you know, if someone was like, hey, I'm running this race, you want to run with me? I could feel, okay, yeah, I can get to the starting line in 3 weeks. Sure.
Yeah, I dig that. Normally, I hate questions like this, but do you see this happening 5, 10, 20 years from now? Like, are we 70 years old going for a run in the White Mountains together? What do you think, Will?
You know, I think for me, there's a lot. I think people are motivated by different things. Some people are motivated by wanting success and praise from the world. I think a lot of my motivation when it comes to my fitness is actually fear-based.
Interesting.
When my dad was 41, he had a major stroke to the cerebellum. And, you know, he was a whitewater rafting guide out in Utah and out west. He was a ski instructor in the winter at Bretton Woods up in the North Country. He was a bike mechanic in the summer at the Littleton Bike Shop in northern New Hampshire. Like, everything about his identity involved being active.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden his cerebellum, which is balanced, it's all of those functions that allow him to be active, was gone. And, you know, that part of his brain is dead now. He survived the stroke. He recovered and got a 3-wheel recumbent bicycle. He rides a 2-wheeler now, you know, and that was 25 years ago.
Wow.
But I think I have this fear that, you know, now that 41 is close to
Sure.
where I am now,
Yeah.
now that I'm a dad like he was, he seems so invincible. And, you know, he used to always say, we're all temporarily able-bodied. You know, it's the one characteristic about ourselves that can change so easily on our commute to work, on our walk on the sidewalk. Like, anything can happen, and we take for granted that we are capable of walking up a set of stairs. We take for granted that we can turn our heads from right to left. We take these things for granted. So I think deep down inside that little 11-year-old boy in me, on the day that my dad had his stroke, knows that my dad was really lucky to survive that stroke. And a lot of that had to do with his fitness. And so I think for me, when I think 20 years in the future, I want to stay fit. I don't think I want to be setting, you know, like the 70-year-old age record in the half marathon or something like that. But I want to be able to climb the presidential range with my grandkids. I want to be one of those people who, as they age, is still feeling fit and capable and, you know, all that. So I'd say, yeah, you know, that is the goal.
I remember something you told me when we were back in high school, and I could be getting this wrong because it's been a bit of time as we discussed, but I think you had met someone who was kind of like this old man on the street, and you're like, what's it like to get old? And he's like, it's awesome. And I remember you told me that with this big smile. And as I've thought about getting older over the past many years, it's like that comes to mind because you never hear that from people. You never see like someone saying getting old is awesome. I love it. But some people do feel that way. You probably have to kind of force yourself to sometimes. But what's your take on that?
Yeah, I mean, you know, being an 8th grade teacher is really interesting.
I bet.
I know you don't get podcasts, 8th grade teachers aren't really hot on the podcast like list. So I really appreciate being here and offering kind of, speaking to the truth of what it's like to hang out with adolescents all day.
Yeah.
But I've taught 8th grade now for 11 years.
Wow.
At the school where I am. And I like to think that I get wiser every year, but they stay the same. Every September, they're coming out of 7th grade. The world around them is changing, but developmentally, they're still the same. And so I think, it's different than having my own children who are aging as well and constantly changing. But I'm able to reflect on what it's like to age and become wiser around them.
Yeah.
And both in the teaching and the craft of being an educator and caring about young people, but also just in my own awareness of what to get stressed about and what not to, and kind of what the biggies and smallies of pressures are, and what's non-negotiable, and where to be flexible and how to meet my students' needs. And so I think the same thing is true with aging. I think it is cool. It is awesome. We're not quite middle-aged, but we're
getting there.
Right. As you think about being like halfway to somewhere, it's like, oh man, yeah, that's kind of interesting. Like, do this once more, and then I'm 70.
Yeah, I said to my wife Allison, I'm just like, did you realize that we're pretty much as close to 20 as we are to 50 now? And we're just like, wow, that's something.
Yeah, it's kind of stunning when you think about that. But I do think that it's awesome because the alternative to it being awesome in terms of a mindset is so crummy. Right. It's like health is merely the slowest means by which you can die. And yet, like, it's not about finding the fountain of youth and, figuring out how to live forever. But if you're not enjoying it, then what are you doing, right? If you think that your best days are in the rearview mirror, that's a really crummy existence, right? Yeah. It's like when I think like, where did I peak? Like, what was my best year? Like, my kids love asking that question. Like, Dad, what was your favorite age? And I'm like, oh man, I don't think I'm there yet. Yeah. I'm looking forward to the next age, right? To that next stage. And so I really think that. And I think finding ways to feel young, I like talking to my students about kind of their best selves. What would your best self do in a circumstance? And I try to convey to my students, we all know what our best self feels like. When we feel like our best selves, when we've gotten enough sleep, when we're energized, when we love what we're doing, when we feel confident in the contributions we're making to the people around us, when we're feeling successful, when we're standing up for things that we believe are right, when we have opportunities to be advocates, we feel so good. When we have things to look forward to, there's such a sense of satisfaction, but it's always a sense of, it's energizing to be our best selves. And so I think, reacquainting ourselves with, okay, what is my best self as a 20-year-old, as a 25-year-old, as a 30-year-old? We need to continually take inventory of ourselves to better understand ourselves, because we do change. And if we're not, we're kind of following these patterns for a long time that we've had that don't really make sense anymore for how we've changed. And, just like when you go a long time without seeing someone and you're like, oh my gosh, you've aged. Or, when we're kids, it's like, you've gotten so big. When we see ourselves in the mirror every day, we forget how physically we've changed, but then emotionally, we've also had experiences that have changed us.
And that applies in so many different ways, and this was true for myself as well. It's like, especially as an athlete, as a runner, or someone who's just like out there chugging and burning through calories. At some point, it's not appropriate to stuff your face at the cafe bar anymore with as much as you want to eat, like we did in high school, when we were on the cross country team. At some point, you've kind of outgrown that, and your body has too, and you have to your point. Take that step back and admit to yourself, like, well, 20 years have passed. No wonder things are a little bit different, But it does take that, like, conscious step back that you need to take. You have to do that in order to reevaluate where you're at, and if these daily practices or habits are still serving you. Because oftentimes you don't realize the things that are or aren't serving you. It's just all kind of automatic because we're all so busy, we're caught up in our things that we're just doing it and executing. So to go back to your earlier point about setting up these systems, one of the most useful things about that and encouraging things about that, even though it's kind of painful to set up sometimes, and it certainly takes intention, is that once you do, you just need to go on your run that day, right? Like if you know that your run is going to be at 5:30 in the morning or at night or whatever, then you just have to execute. You don't have to wonder, like, am I going to do it today? Am I going to not do it? Am I going to go for 30 miles or 5? And but if you just get one step ahead of yourself that way and be like, what is the life that I actually want to create for myself? I think I would imagine being a teacher kind of forces that upon you, because you can't ignore the fact that every year is going by because you get this whole new set of, kind of 7th to 8th graders, right? Like fresh 8th graders.
Yeah, totally. And I think, as you think about what it is that you need, it goes into everything that you talk about on this show, right? You have all these experts, all these people who have these experience and perspectives and have done tons of research. And, you need to figure out these different types of eating. You can't do them all. These different types of exercising, you can't do them all. My wife bought running shoes yesterday, and she had tried to call me and be like, hey, what should I do? And I was busy and didn't answer it. And she's like, hey, so I bought running shoes without asking you. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
Cool. She's never run a race in her life.
Wow.
Right. She was a dancer and a musician and does yoga and is very fit. And she signed up for an all women's race in a couple months. And it was just on a whim. One of her friends was like, hey, I'm doing this run like a mother. You want to do it with me? She was like, yeah, I do. And she was like, oh my gosh, Will, what did I do? I signed up for this race.
Yeah.
And so she went and bought herself a new pair of running shoes. And she got a pair. And I was like, that's awesome. I'm glad you got a pair of running shoes, that you like the way they look, you like the way they feel. But you should take some inventory, like journal about your running shoes each week. How do they feel? Because there's so many different kinds. You can have kinds with tons of cushioning, with tons of support. You can have really minimalist ones. You can have all these different types. So this is one type. You'll be running in these for the next, 500 miles, however long that takes you. But take inventory, because then next time you can say, those ones that were minimalist, my Achilles really hurt. They hurt my knees, my hips hurt. My feet were really sore afterwards. And then try something else. Try those on. Try some with tons of cushioning, the maximalist model, right? Like try something in the middle. Because I think asking ourselves, what do I like? What are my preferences? What works for my body and my feet? With everything, whether it's running shoes, whether it's eating, is so caffeine intake, right? Like how many cups of coffee? Sometimes you need to have that extra cup to be like, okay.
Yeah.
And then there might be a day where you're like, I don't know if coffee really works. Maybe I need to try tea, right? And you see this in people around you and they're like, so I gave up coffee. I gave up eating mammals. I gave up whatever the thing is.
Yeah.
People try things but if you're not getting that feedback loop of how am I feeling, that's tricky.
That is an
because you're
excellent point.
not actually learning anything about how that's changing you. You're just responding.
And you're also not as aware of the alternatives out there, right? Like, as you mentioned, there are so many different kinds of running shoes. And I tend to go for the minimalist most of the time, but not all the time. I've run 30 milers in very cushy shoes. And
right.
And you have to, I think, challenge yourself to take those risks, don't you? Like, for your wife to sign up for that race, maybe she needed that to get the shoes and then to kind of set up those other habits. Because if you don't have that thing that you're shooting for or that's pulling you towards, then maybe you don't do those other little incremental steps, like lacing up your shoes and walking out the door and going for a run, right?
Well, right. I mean, nobody wakes up one day and just becomes the person that they want to be, whether it's running a race. It is those incremental steps in kind of moving the needle of the compass 1 degree, right? Because 1 degree on the compass on day one, you can look to your left and see where you started yesterday.
Yeah.
But 2 years later, 1 degree on the compass, you're in a totally different place than you would have been otherwise.
Yeah.
And, I think going back to the aging question, I had a friend who turned 40 and she said, I've been thinking a lot about being halfway to 80.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked myself, who do I want to be when I'm 80? Like, what are the values that I want to have?
Right.
And she was like, I don't want to care what my body looks like when I'm 80. I want to be one of those women who's just like, hey, this is me.
Yeah.
And I want to know everyone in my neighborhood when I'm 80. I want to be that lady who sits on her front porch as an 80-year-old and talks to everyone and everyone knows her.
Wow.
And she said, but I'm not going to wake up the day after my 79th birthday and suddenly become those things.
Right.
I need to start as a 40-year-old thinking, what am I doing today to ensure that 40 years from now, I know all my neighbors?
Yeah.
Right. It starts when you're 40 with introducing yourself, with baking a pie, with going over, with helping someone shovel their, driveway, whatever it is. You don't wake up one day and just become that thing. But we all think like we have these great ideals of what we want to be like when we're 70 or 80.
Yeah.
But we need to start acting now in a way that will get us there.
Yeah. And for you, how many people out there who are listening right now or in the world want to write a book before they die in their lifetimes at some point? You've already done 2. And I would imagine that, especially hearing you talk about the blog post, it's like, it's never perfect, right? You're never ready to publish it. You're never ready to start writing it. You're never ready to do any of these things. So can you explain like how you take risks like that? What is the process?
Yeah. Our school, we have a phrase that we're a risk-taking, mistake-making community.
That's cool.
And it's a pre-K through 9th grade school. And so we often think about, presenting opportunities to our students to, one, take risks, but also to make some mistakes. Mm-hmm. And, I'm very much someone who, when there's a challenge or an opportunity or sometimes a brainstorm, I like jump in with 2 feet, right? I'm not like, at the swimming pool, I'm not the person who like gets their towel all set up and puts on the sunscreen and does everything and then gets in the pool. It's like, I'm like kicking my sandals off and throwing my shirt off as I'm running to the pool and diving in. And I'm fine with that shock of the water and that it's cold. And, I like taking those risks and I'm open to them, and you and I had so many adventures as teenagers where it was those types of things where it's like, yeah, I'm up for that. Let's go do that. Sure.
I just remember getting that old VW Jetta stuck in snowbanks so many times, just going out for a drive for no reason, just hanging out with Will. That was
exactly right.
It was great, man.
What does it feel like to have a car fishtail underneath you on an icy road? What does it, right? Like all those sorts of things that are like, what's the worst that's going to happen? And it's like, then talking ourselves out of it and being like, well, that's probably not going to happen anyway.
Yeah.
Right. Like that is the worst, but like that won't happen. Right.
Yeah.
Pushing shopping carts into a lake or something like that and going off the pier. But when you think about, taking those risks in terms of doing something like writing a book, I think I really take to heart that idea that kind of you never actually finish a piece of art. You never actually finish something creative. You just abandon it. And it's about like, when am I going to say, you know what, this is good enough? And for a long time when when I was struggling with my own perfectionism, I had a little sticky note on my desk and on my computer and next to my bureau in my bedroom. And it said, you do enough, you have enough, you are enough.
Cool.
And those 3 reminders were so important to me as I was coming into adulthood and being a young dad and providing for my family. And, Southwestern Connecticut is a wealthy part of our country. And, thinking, okay, I have enough, right? Like, what does it mean to have enough? It's it feels, in American culture a lot of the time, like no one has enough, right? And everyone kind of says, well, if I just had 20% more, right? And everyone thinks that's kind of the American dream is like a little more than I have now would be the perfect amount. Because that would enable me to do X, Y, Z. And then they get there and then they see, oh, just a little bit more. Right. And realizing I do have enough. And I think, I have some impatience with like the publishing process, right? So I self-published and kind of told some people, and then I've really relied on like word of mouth for people to learn about things. And I think knowing why you're doing something is really important.
Mm-hmm.
People who want to write a book, who might be out there listening, really kind of journaling or even expounding upon that question of like, why do I want this? Yes. Do I want this because is it fear-based? Is it success-based? Do I want to make a lot of money off this book? Do I think I have this novel idea to share? What's the motivation behind it? Because once you know your motivation, then you can think about who's going to read it, because you can't write a book that everyone on the planet is going to love. And you need to know who are my readers and how can I connect to them. And so when I wrote this book, right, this one that you had right there, my motivation was I wanted to create a final exam review packet for my world culture students that they would never throw away. Right. So I still have all those classes we took in high school. I saved everything. I have like boxes with my notes.
That's so cool.
Those things, because I loved those teachers and I loved those classes and I held on to it. And I think probably deep down, I knew I might use this again someday.
Yeah.
Right. And so I find myself as a teacher flipping back through those incredible teachers that we had through their notes.
We had incredible teachers.
We had incredible teachers. And I find myself saying phrases that they said, and so I wanted to create something that my students wouldn't throw away, because it just pained me to see all these incredible conversations in a course like World Cultures that I had with these 14-year-old kids. And then to see them just taking this stack of papers and being like, whoo, glad we're done with that.
Yeah.
And I'm like, no. This is far too important. The stakes are way too high because you're going to become an adult someday. And like these things we talked about matter. Mm-hmm. It wasn't just for that test. And so what I ended up coming to was writing this book for them. And I was like, you can't throw this away because this is a book that's dedicated to each of you, and it's a letter to you. But it's also your final exam review packet. And so that was my motivation. I never wanted to make a penny off of it, right? It wasn't about being on Barnes & Noble's bestsellers list, mm-hmm. because it's not written for you, right?
Yeah.
It's for my students. It's called The Things We Shared in the Time We Had, a letter to my students. And it's very much a love letter to the experience that we shared in this one year, but also it's why I love being a teacher. It's why I care about my students, and why it's easy to have empathy for them, right? And so that was my motivation there. And I think because I knew that, it became easy to move forward with publishing it and saying, gosh, I need this done by final exam, so that's my cutoff date.
And because it's so unique, I mean, it may be for your students, but I've certainly had a lot of fun reading through it. It's so unique that you can kind of do whatever you want. And you realize that a book, I'll just hold this up. Sorry for those of you who are on audio, but basically, I mean, even the spacing of this you're playing with on every page, you're having fun with it. It's a space for you to play and a place for other people to learn. I'll just share one of these quotes that stuck out to me. There's a Japanese saying that means above up, there is always something above up. And to me, that kind of sums up your personality a little bit, Will. Ever since high school, you've been like this. At least from the outside looking in, you've been able to see the magic of life instead of just slogging through it, because life becomes very mundane, especially if you just follow what you're told as you enter adulthood and then you get older and all this stuff. And you do need to challenge yourself not to slog, to find that up above up. Tell us about that a little bit more.
Yeah, so I mean, when I present that when we study Japan, and we're coming up on that study with my students right now after spring break, so I'm excited to share that expression with them. But my students always look at it two ways, right? One is they're like, wait, does that mean you can never be the best? Or do they mean constantly strive, like press on regardless? And is it about resilience or is it about failure? And I try not to answer that question for them.
Yeah.
Right. I let them let's look at the other things we know about Japanese culture. Let's look at these elements of the samurai code, the Bushido code. Let's look at, the things that are valued in the way that they respect their elders in Japanese culture, the way that things even like timeliness and punctuality and their public transportation system, right? And the levels of perfection that culturally the Japanese hold themselves to. What do you think? Let's look through that lens. But then also, what resonates with you?
Yeah.
How does that quote, once someone says a quote or has some proverb or some expression and puts it out there in the world, someone writes a book, it's not theirs anymore. They've lost ownership of it, right? A song that's misinterpreted by thousands of people, a chorus, right, that everyone's singing along with without realizing what the songwriter intended.
Excuse me while I kiss this guy. Yeah.
Right, exactly. It can totally change things. And so I always turn it back on them. But I think, I love the quote because it is this constant reality that we're all amateurs.
Yeah.
We're all constantly reinventing ourselves and thinking deeply. One of the people that I talk to my students about when we study this is a runner named Nick Simmons. I don't know if you know Nick, but he's 800 meter runner. And he went to a D3 school out west, and he didn't have any offers for scholarships for college. He had been a multiple time state champion in high school, but he wasn't built like other distance runners. And he kind of calls himself the bison, and he's got big shoulders, and he's bigger and kind of runs with his arms out like this. And he decided that he was going to go to a D3 school, and he ended up becoming multiple time All-American.
Wow.
And then made 2 Olympic teams in the 800 meters and, went to 2 Olympics, but he also always believed that there was a ceiling that he hadn't reached. And so he was running for Brooks at one point in his career, and he put his foot down saying, I don't want to have to be forced being on the US team that's sponsored by Nike to wear Nike apparel.
Yeah.
And he said, I'm going to boycott the world championships and not go as an athlete because I believe that this is the right thing to do. And he didn't go. And he put his foot down. But as one athlete, he was able, right? And so just thinking about above, up, there's always up. He looked outside of the scope of performance and said, there's something that I believe in that I want to put my foot down on. I've already achieved. I've made 2 Olympic teams. And I'm going to forego this because I believe it's right.
Yeah.
And he's someone who then retired from running and founded a company that I absolutely love called Run Gum. And it's a company that looks to caffeinate athletes in a way that doesn't put liquid in their stomachs, right? And so he was a biochemistry major in college and an athlete, and was like, how can I combine these 2 things to get a better delivery method to boost metabolism, to get some B vitamins in there, some amino acids, and give athletes a caffeine boost, either during or before performance. And so he's someone who I share his story with my students because I'm like, so here he is. He could have just settled to be one of the best 800 meter runners in the world. He was a medalist at the World Championships, made 2 Olympic teams. For many people, that would be enough.
Yeah.
But then he said, okay, what am I going to do? What's next? What's the next challenge that might look very different? But it's just thinking in those lateral ways of what are my connections? What have I learned from this experience that can vault me into another area, and how can I leverage that? And so I think, that's the way I think about my writing, my teaching, my running, like my parenting. It all kind of becomes this one philosophy and mindset that is interconnected.
It puts you back into beginner's mind, doesn't it?
Yeah.
And you need to go there. Like for me, one thing that I'm working through right now is I've been playing guitar for 25, 30 years at this point, and I get really bored and plateau and all of that. So I'm learning jazz piano, and it's kicking my butt. I'm studying with a couple of people actually who are just kicking my butt like a personal trainer might, if you were out of shape. And that is so humbling and so fun. And I'm learning more that way than I would be if I were playing guitar 6 hours, 10 hours a day right now. And but it does take like that. Well, maybe I'm going to go to piano where I'm weak and vulnerable and where I don't have the speed and I can take everything for granted. You know what I mean? So like if you broke your foot, example. It's like, I doubt you'd still be running, obviously, but you wouldn't be stopping either. I'm sure you'd find that next challenge, whatever it is.
Right. Yeah, totally. I think that we would. And, I think that's one thing about working with young people, especially in this day and age where they're so tethered to devices.
Yeah.
For me, I'm barely in that age, and you probably feel the same, where like my phone is a tool.
Yes.
That I rely on heavily, but it's still a tool. Mm-hmm. For my students, it's really an appendage. I see in them, even though they're not allowed to have those devices out during the school day unless the teacher is saying, hey, pull out your phones. Mm-hmm. They know where it is at every second of every day, right? Like I still have times where I like forget my phone somewhere. And I'm like, where's my phone? My students do not ever ask that question.
Interesting.
They always know where their phone is.
By 8th grade, this is true.
What's that?
By 8th grade, this is true. Probably even before that, right?
Totally. Before 8th grade.
Yeah.
Right. And so reminding kids, like, there are things you can learn. You don't have to just consume the world.
Yeah.
Right. It's not just about posting and having this social network be a back and forth relationship. But it's also not just about consumption. It's about creation, but also just your own exploration in yourself. And, so we talk a lot about writing letters, and what does writing a letter do for a young person that's different than sending a text message?
Yeah. Or
even an email. And what is seeing someone's handwriting and sharing gratitude in a text message with an emoji, of like praying hands or something to say thanks, versus getting a handwritten letter from someone in an envelope that just very quickly says, hey, that meant a lot to me, the way you spent time with me yesterday. Thanks.
Yeah. Man, these kids need you. These adults need you, Will.
Right.
What are some things that adults are missing out on right now, especially the American listeners, that they might be able to learn from the 8th graders in the World of Cultures class?
Oh, man. Some things that they're missing out on. I think that reflective process, when we study Africa, mm-hmm. I have all these words that I think are so important for my students to learn, and a lot of them are in that book. But one of them is a word from the Twi language of Ghana, and the word is Sankofa. And it essentially means it's okay to look back for what you've forgotten. And I think that speaks to that reflective process of realizing that, like, we've had wisdom spoken into our lives by people at different points, and we've had experiences that build us up. But if we neglect those experiences and we don't reflect back on them and remember that we've had them, it's so easy to forget. It's so easy to get drawn into the next thing and to forget all of the things that we know and that we've learned about ourselves and about the world around us.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely one of them. I think recognizing that there's a collective responsibility in communities and in cultures. There's so many books now about tribes and about just kind of rites of passage and things that are lacking in American culture.
Yeah.
And the ways that sports can feel like a tribe, that there's a collective affinity for something and a purpose. But there, sports is also the opiate of the people, right?
Yeah.
We can forget that as a Yankees fan or a Red Sox fan or a, New York Jets fan or whatever, that there is more than that, right? That we're looking for these connections between each other, but really the connections that can keep us from asking deep questions, right? That asking my students, what's the hardest thing you've done in the last week? And having them free write about that for 3 minutes, and then talking without specifics, without requiring them to share, but about some of the general ideas that they find there, is so powerful. I think often that teaching them English allows them to look in here, and teaching world cultures gets them to look out there.
Yeah.
And I get to have the same students for both subjects.
That's cool.
And it's really cool. And, and then I think the other thing is just thinking about feedback. I think about the feedback that I give my students a lot. So much of a teacher's job historically has been to evaluate and to coach, right? Like the coaching is where you're teaching them how to do something differently or to develop new skills or things like that. And the evaluation is, so how did you do in displaying these things? But the affirmation and the building up of people around us is also so necessary. And I think that it's actually, studies have been done that people, and young people especially, need 4 times the praise for every one piece of constructive criticism.
Sure.
And
adults too, I would imagine.
Adults
we all do,
too,
yeah.
right? In any of these things we've talked about our own personal explorations and growth. And so the way that I've worked that into kind of a system, right, is I have on my desk right here these little pieces of paper that just say high five from Mr. McDonough. It's gone through a bunch of different iterations. There's different colors, and I just color photocopy these. And I'll just write to 2 students every day a high five, something that I've noticed that's qualitative, that'll never show up in their GPA or in their report card even, about the way they've listened to one of their classmates, about the way that they're engaging with material. We have buddies at our school where they have younger students that they're mentoring, the way that they interact with their buddy playing Foursquare. It could be anything. It could be a cheerful hello that went beyond what was necessary, right? When they were kinder than necessary in some way. And just praising them and lifting them up for something like that, or something that they're working really hard on. And then they have this tangible piece of paper to take home and put somewhere. And the feedback that I've gotten from parents, from the kids themselves, is so powerful, because all of a sudden you have this piece of paper saying, I believe in you, or saying you're capable. And it means so much more than the 92 they get on a test in my class or anything like that. And emphasizing that, because it's so easy to just look at results right now, and knowing what we know about college admissions, and for a lot of my students, even high school admissions, if they're going to boarding school or competitive day schools around here, just thinking about that. And I think that, coincides with letters too. They get my handwriting, chicken scratchy as it may be, but I'm prioritizing that, and I know that it's worth it. Even though that doesn't fit in the triage of what I have to do by the end of the day, I know that writing 2 of those and taking 5 minutes to do so is always worth it.
Yeah, I love that. Yeah. What are some of the challenges that are facing the next generation of athletes or aspiring health nuts, or what are we facing now that we may not have been before? That's right in your face.
I think that a lot of it is that element of consumption.
Yeah.
That, it's so easy to forget that as athletes, as health, it's about our interactions with the world around us. And so when we think about consumption, we think about both intellectual consumption and the things that we're listening to, the things that we're watching, the things that we're consuming in that way, and food and our relationship with food, and exercise in the world around us. The number of articles now being written about the benefits of going outside, and how we actually, in the United States, it's the safest time ever to be a kid, and yet kids are protected more than ever.
Yeah.
Right? Just with, the ability to monitor young people and their inability to go and play by themselves, I think is going to be a real challenge for them as they become adults, that not having that skill set of creating their own adventures, right? We need these young people who are going to be coming into the workforce 15 years from now to love adventure, right? Like, they are going to be solving all the problems that we've been causing. And for them to do that, we need them to be creative. We need them to have a sense of empathy and compassion and read people, but also to be healthy, to be able to engage with the world around them. And so I think that is a really big part of it.
Yeah. And consumption comes from so many different directions now. I feel like when we were kids, we were just expected to entertain ourselves, go out in the woods, and or like you said, I think that's such a great way to say it, creating your own adventures. now, even if we're standing in line as adults, like you see people playing Candy Crush and texting and just absorbing every last second of time, when in fact, just by default, not necessarily because we wanted to, but we were reflecting all the time growing up in New Hampshire because there was nothing to do.
Right.
We had to create our own adventures, create our own little projects. I created little radio shows on my tape player, and now I have a podcast, right? Like that's because I was playing around when I was 5, and I love the outdoors, and it feels at home because that's what I was doing back then. So yeah, I think to your point, it's so important to not get too caught up in how easy it is to consume all this stuff, because we could create more than ever now, right? Like you could argue that now is the best time ever to create anything. Yes, it's saturated, but also like you're in Connecticut. I'm at 8,000 feet in the mountains of Colorado, and it's working. People are listening all around the world. It's a time of opportunity. So we're coming up on time, but maybe we should finish out with, so those were the challenges, some of the challenges that are facing the next generation. But what are some of the opportunities? What are some of the things that light you up?
I think the things that light me up are connecting. It all happens with connections with people.
Yeah.
Right. It's about helping people feel alive, because I feel alive when I'm engaging with other people and feeding off their energy. Right. So I almost sometimes think of myself as like a librarian of ideas, where like a librarian's job is to find the perfect book for the perfect person. Yeah. Right. It's like, I know you and your interests, and this book is for you. Right. And connect that person to the book to have an experience.
Yeah.
And I love doing that with ideas. I love connecting big ideas out there in the world, or connecting two people with ideas to say, ooh, you have to meet this person. Right. Like I get so excited sharing people with people because of their ideas and being present for that. And I think helping people be reminded that it would be so easy if someone made a movie about someone's life, for so many people in our culture today to be cast as like the third random brown-haired guy in their own movie. Mm-hmm. It's like, this is their life, and yet they're not the hero, right? That adventure, that action, feeling alive. So many people, nobody would say when they're playing whatever game on their phone, oh yeah, I feel most alive, right? Like I wake up, my heart wakes up, my energy is high when I'm playing this game. It's like, no, it doesn't. No one feels the most alive. But I think about, even in our adulthood, right? When you and I have spent time together, whether it was coming to visit you, whether it was hanging out in the national parks of southern Utah, it's like we were alive. And even just the conversations we're having in the car, driving from one place to another with these like incredible canyons around us, we're alive because of the conversations we're having and the caliber and the direction that they're going, because it feels like anything's possible.
Yeah. You've always rubbed off on me in that way, where you feel like anything is possible. In fact, in many ways, you introduced me to the West. Dude, that was the first time that I'd ever seen Moab and arches and Canyonlands and all that. And here I am living here now, and like going there and meeting up actually with our old teachers and some of our old classmates. It's so wonderful. But anyway, before we go, Will, can you please tell folks where they can find your book, where they can find your work, and what's happening next?
Yeah, so if you search my name on Amazon, Will McDonough, both my books are available on Amazon. One is a collection of poems called Volcanic Love, Poems from a Flawed Young Dad Who Feels Too Much and Tries Really Hard. That one was really a love poem, or a collection of love poems to my family and to that struggle of being a young dad. And then the other one is called The Things We Shared in the Time We Had, A Letter to My Students. Both are available on Amazon. It's the best way to get them. And, I mentioned Run Gum earlier. Run Gum's awesome. You can find that at rungum.com. I use it all the time for my long runs halfway through, and then for any races or fast work I'm doing. And then also, as a teacher, we can't have gum in school, but in between classes at the end of the day, if I need that metabolic boost, that caffeine is awesome. So those would be my 3 plugs.
Right on.
And then, what's next? I have so many ideas and so many things on my back burner of new book ideas, collaborations in terms of presenting at conferences and things like that. But I will surely keep you attuned to all those things and happenings.
And we'll have to have you back on this show because there is just a wealth of knowledge and magic behind everything happening in Will McDonough world. So I'm so happy to have you on, man. It's such a pleasure to reconnect. And please come back on soon.
Totally. Love being here. Thanks for having me.
This episode is brought to you by listeners like you and Future Greens. Let me ask you something. Did you eat your veggies today? All of them? Believe it or not, fewer than 10% of adults and children in America get their recommended fruits and veggies in daily. That is absolutely atrocious, and many millions of us are suffering from disease, obesity, and ill health as a direct result. So my wife Allison and I decided to do something about it. Now you can double your intake of fruits and veggies in less than 60 seconds without the sugar or carbs. We're excited to bring you our new superfood greens powder called Future Greens to make it easy to get organic, nutrient-dense veggies in every day, no matter where you are. Future Greens is packed with vitamins, minerals, and filling prebiotic fiber from whole organic veggies, sprouts, algae, and berries, including kale, beet, parsley, collard greens, cauliflower sprouts, broccoli sprouts, spirulina, chlorella, blueberries, raspberries, and much more. Since Future Greens is preserved, you can get your greens on even when fresh produce, salads, and smoothies are far out of reach. Future Greens makes getting nutrition easy, and it tastes great if I do say so myself. Future Greens is a smart and convenient source of nutrition for disaster preparedness, road trips, camping, athletics, and more. It travels great in the car, on the plane, or in a spaceship. Just make sure you activate artificial gravity before opening. Basically, it's like vegetables from the future. So if you're looking to increase your energy and health without the crash from caffeine or sugar, meet your new best friend, Future Greens. As a listener of Fat Burning Man, you can get a 20% discount to try it yourself right now. Just visit fatburningman.com/greens to get over 20% off when you subscribe and save. You'll get our coolest new concoction from Wild Superfoods called Future Greens. Again, just head on over to fatburningman.com/greens to get over 20% off your purchase. We'll see you there. Well, hey there, listener. This is Abel one more time, and I just want to say thank you for listening to this episode of the Fat Burning Man Show. If you liked it, don't forget to hit that subscribe button wherever you might be listening to or watching this show right now. And if you have a second, please leave me a quick review for the Fat Burning Man Show. I read every single one of them, and every time you leave a review, it gives us a little boost in the rankings, and that helps other people find this show. And if you can think of someone else who might enjoy and benefit from this free show, please take a second to share it with a friend or a family member. And if they're like, what is this Fat Burning Man thing? That's a really silly name. You could be like, you're right, but here's the deal. We've recorded over 250 episodes of the Fat Burning Man Show with thought leaders in health from all over the world. And so far, we've won 4 awards, hitting #1 in health in more than 8 countries internationally. We have more than 30 million downloads already, but we're just getting started. I can't believe any of this, by the way, and couldn't do any of this without you, so thanks once again. But here's some more good news. You can download and listen to every single episode of the Fat Burning Man Show for free with 0 outside advertisements, no outside sponsors, and no corporate overlords. All you have to do is type in fatburningman.com. I'll give you a second here just to type it in, fatburningman.com. And you'll get all the show notes, transcripts, and video and audio versions for all the past episodes of the Fat Burning Man Show for free. Better yet, enter your email at fatburningman.com, sign up for my newsletter, and I'll even send you a quick start guide so you can take your health into your own hands right now, along with a few of our ridiculously tasty recipes as a special thanks for signing up. Once again, just go to fatburningman.com right now, enter your best email to get your free goodies with a bonus surprise straight to your inbox. This is Abel James signing off. Thank you so much for listening once again, and have a great week.